Frank Miller's Sin City might be the most dangerous take on the concept of noir in comics, with characters that are a lot more than your everyday comic book villains. And when Rodriguez brought them to the big screen, he ended up subverting the audience's expectations by pulling in some ropes that were completely unexpected. While Elijah Wood and Kevin remains the most unbelievable choice, it was Nick Stahl as the disgusting Yellow Bastard that remains memorable. Let's explore the character of the Yellow Bastard and how a detective hell-bent on finishing him turned him into the yellow freak of nature. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin.
You look different, but I bet you can recognize my voice.
The most disgusting villain ever, the Yellow Bastard. There have been numerous comic book villains, and yet nothing comes close to this disgusting creation from Frank Miller and his Sin City anthology of stories. It's not every day that a villain's appearance manages to be the ugliest thing about him, and that foul smell makes his presence felt everywhere he goes. Miller created him after being disappointed by Clint Eastwood's The Deadpool, and the legendary comic book writer went on to say, "Yellow Bastard is a villain in the tradition of Joker and other Batman villains as such, who originally were terrifying characters. It was only the old TV show that have made them more clownish, and I think that the Yellow Bastard is going to remind people how scary that stuff can be. It's also going to remind people how scary a comic can be. And I hope to hell it reminds people of a time before people started thinking comic books were just for kids, because they never really have been. But maybe Sin City can help my other field stand a bit taller. But before we jump right into the yellowness of this Yellow Bastard, we have to dig a little bit into his past. And I want to let you know, it doesn't get any better at any point.
Side effects. I'm not complaining, though. Since you've been gone, I've been...
Origins of this dirty being. Before he became the ugly yellow stench that would haunt many people, including a police detective, the Yellow Bastard was Ethan Rourke Jr., also known as Rourke Jr. He was a father's boy, and his father was quite an influential man, considering he was the senator of Basin City and quite the corrupted monster himself. He had murdered his wife with a baseball bat, but never got arrested, even though he had his fingerprints all over the scene of the crime. If that doesn't explain his influence, then there's Rourke Jr.'s uncle, Cardinal Rourke. Senator Rourke managed to use his police connections to cover up for his crimes, along with Rourke Jr. Rourke Jr. was a child rapist, and he only targets girls under a certain age. Still, Ethan had different plans for him, as he wanted this monster to be the president one day. But all these plans crashed due to one police detective and an 11-year-old girl named Nancy Callahan. After serving the force for 30 years and earning a reputation for being one of the most by-the-book detectives, Detective John Hartigan was looking forward to his retirement because his heart trouble was asking him to let go. But one thing still bothered him: the unfinished case of the serial killer and rapist who targets young girls, Rourke Jr. Even though Senator Rourke had made several attempts on his life and also used the means of the corrupt system, John was dedicated to bringing justice to the victims. On the last day of his service, John is called in to investigate the case of the newest victim of Junior, an 11-year-old girl, Nancy Callahan. While John was not willing to let the case go, his partner, the corrupt officer Bob, who had been taking bribes from the Rourke family, petitioned him to drop the case. John doesn't listen and goes right into the crime scene and launches an attack on Junior's men and finally confronts the monster. He shoots at his left ear, right hand, and then his genitals. But before he could shoot his final bullets to kill Junior, his partner arrived and shot him multiple times in the back. The story would be over here, but no, the senator wasn't going to let things go by so easily, and he decides to frame the detective for raping Nancy and kill anyone who knew the truth. He pays for Hartigan's angina cure, not as a favor, but as a means of making him suffer more. As the accusations against Hartigan made it out, his family and friends, everyone he loved, started abandoning him, except for Nancy. Turns out that the senator wasn't only keeping Hartigan alive, as he had taken the help of some of the biggest doctors in order to save his son's life. A number of surgeons, gurus, homeopathic witch doctors, and genetic therapists were brought in to cure Junior and make sure that his genitals could also be regrown. But all of that would leave a horrific side effect that ended up giving him the apartment title that he would now be known as. Once fully recovered, he continues his criminal activities, while Hartigan suffers from his wrongdoings, as he is forced to confess that he was responsible for everything Junior did. Junior ends up visiting Hartigan in prison, and it is here that Hartigan discovers what has become of the individual who ruined his life, along with the lives of hundreds of other young girls. The surgeries and number of operations had left Junior with yellow skin and yellow blood, and a disgusting stench surrounded him. Now, wherever Hartigan went, the stench would somehow be there along with the yellow bastard, somewhere in the corner, following Hartigan. After Hartigan is released, the senator forgives him and gives him parole, only to make him suffer the consequences of good actions through the false accusations everyone would know him for. Thus began the final chapters in the lives of the yellow bastard and Hartigan, or whatever's left of the once great detective. The death of that yellow bastard. Once released from prison, Hartigan goes to look for the one person who trusted him, while the rest of the world turned away, Nancy. He wanted to make sure that Nancy was okay, something that had put him through a lot of trouble the last time, but he intended to shut that case once and for all. Hartigan finds Nancy at Katie's bar, where she works as a stripper, but Hartigan notices that the foul stench is also present here, and that yellow bastard has been following him. He convinces Nancy that she is in danger, and asks her to go with him, but as the two head out, the yellow bastard follows them in a car behind and starts shooting at them. Hartigan shoots back and manages to hit him on the neck, and he starts spurting yellow blood and crashes his car. To make sure that he's dead, Hartigan goes in to investigate, only to find that there's no one. The two end up camping in a nearby motel, but before they can find any peace, the yellow bastard pops up and holds them hostage, this time tying up Hartigan with a noose. Now that he reveals his true identity, Hartigan is sent back to the day when the nightmarish journey began, and the nightmare is not over. He takes Nancy to the Rourke family farm to finish what he had started, leaving Hartigan hanging from the noose as he clings to his life. But before he could pass out, Hartigan managed to use a piece of the broken window to cut himself free and beat the hooligans who had come to check on him. Once again, Hartigan goes to the crime scene to finish the yellow bastard once and for all. Meanwhile, the yellow bastard ties up Nancy and whips her to get a scream out of her, something that would help him continue with his deeds. Nancy realizes that without the scream, the yellow bastard is impotent, and she manages to hold herself back from falling into his desire. The yellow bastard gets even more impatient and continues his attempt to make her scream in a much more brutal fashion now. Hartigan arrives on the scene, and before the yellow bastard could seize the moment to stab the reeling Hartigan from recovering from his wounds, Hartigan stabs him in the chest with a knife. He then proceeds to tear off the bastard's genitalia and then puts him on the ground while beating his head to a pulp. Soon, there's nothing left of the yellow bastard's head, but just a puddle of yellow blood. And the story of this disgusting, monstrous being is finally over. The personality of this depraved being, Rourke Jr., was a spoiled brat who hid under his father's shadow to continue with his misdeeds of raping and murdering children. It was only when Hartigan became a hurdle, he realized that someone was out there, stopping him and letting him know, no, you can't do that. It's wrong. But by then, this individual had no redeeming aspect, and he could only be dealt with in the manner that Hartigan did. Later, when his corrupt father managed to bring him back, using a variety of surgeries and operations, the result was a horrendous yellow appearance with a foul stench. It was as if everything that he had done in his life had started looking back at him, and it was almost a payback for all his horrendous crimes. He truly became the monster he intended to be, and his appearance was probably a result of that. In fact, his name, the Yellow Bastard, might be more than just about his appearance, as the title is also slang for a coward. And we know that he was indeed a coward who depended entirely on his corrupt father. He goes on and continues with his crimes because he knows he can get away. But the truly disgusting aspect about the Yellow Bastard, apart from his pride in killing dozens of young girls, is the fact that what really works for him, and it's their screaming, in a truly colorless world filled with crime, the Yellow Bastard went against several aspects of a human's moral code. He raped and killed girls for his satisfaction, and through Nancy Miller's life, we understood that he is also taking away any idea of a normal life from those who survived his savage attack. Frank Miller has created one of the most disgusting villains in comic book history with this character, a vile pedophile who stands apart from anyone else, a tumor to society that affected many lives. In fact, he's so driven by his selfishness that he decides to rape Nancy and torture her just to make Hartigan suffer, purely for revenge. The face of rot. The Sin City world is entirely depicted through black and white, and even the Robert Rodriguez film stuck to that and gave us a visceral cinematic experience. But once the Yellow Bastard appears, it stands out from the rest of the world and the other characters, making for one of the most noticeable aspects of the entire frame. What stands out is that Rourke Jr. was originally a handsome young man in his mid-20s and had long hair with a fashion sense that fit his spoiled nature. But once he became the Yellow Bastard due to the years of operations done on him, he turned into a monstrous being that hardly had anything human about it. Once the operations and the various side effects came into full effect, he was left looking like a troll without hair and some features enlarged, while others seemed absolutely yellow. But what stood out was the yellow. The yellow would follow him everywhere, even in his blood, and remind him of the actions of Hartigan and how he had turned him into this monstrous, sadist being, bringing the Yellow Bastard to life. When Robert Rodriguez and Frank Miller collaborated to bring the Sin City graphic novel to life, it was rather interesting to imagine how the character of the Yellow Bastard would be interpreted. However, once it became clear that the duo would make the film very similar to the comic book, including the black and white tone, it was no wonder that the Yellow Bastard had every reason to appear as the Yellow Monster and once again haunt us. Nick Stahl was given the role, and even though it is impossible to imagine him as this nefarious villain, they managed to nail it. In fact, Robert Rodriguez talked about the casting, as he said, "The character of Yellow Bastard and Junior, who Nick Stahl plays, are so different looking. I originally thought about casting different actors. I met with Nick, and we ended up liking him so much, we thought maybe with makeup, he'll be so transformed we won't recognize him. So Nick got to play both characters. But then I was like, well, Nick, leave me some phone messages. Work on the voice, because the main thing Frank's book says, the voice is very recognizable." So he worked on the voice, and he'd leave me phone messages in that voice. And I totally forgot I told him that. So sometimes I'd go home and I'd check messages and I'd hear, imitating Nick's voice, "Hey Robert, it's me." He'd say some creepy things, then hang up, and I'd realize, oh, maybe that's Nick. He must be working on that voice. He got the voice. In the many gruesome characters that appear in these stories, Nick Stahl's take on the Yellow Bastard stands out as one of the most shocking turns. And that makes sense, considering the character is probably the worst among the number of characters that appear here. Marvelous verdict. The Yellow Bastard stands as one of the most gruesome creations of Frank Miller, filled with the rot that is both physical and moral. It is interesting how Miller was influenced by something that actually stands so far away from what he ended up creating. The unnerving presence, along with yellow color, is something that makes this villain something that you won't forget easily. His acts and his crimes are something that will continue to bother the reader, as it ends up making the very detective that killed him commit suicide. But the suicide was not for the sake of the Yellow Bastard, but just an attempt to ensure that Nancy Miller's life isn't ruined forever. Yellow Bastard might look like a horrible man who had been turned into the visual representation of his sins, but he's actually the face of something that knows it will never be punished, never to be penalized until someone like Hartigan decides to pull the trigger. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one, and be safe. Thanks, everyone.